everybody. It's noon. It's the first Tuesday in December. I'm Britin Bostick. I'm the Downtown and Historic Planner for the City of Georgetown, joined by my excellent colleague, Ann Evans, reference librarian for our award-winning Georgetown Public Library. And we, every first Tuesday of the month, have the opportunity to share photos with you, share histories and stories, and show you things that really interest us and that we find fun and fascinating about our town. This month, we're really excited to be joined by Kim McAuliffe, who is the Downtown Development Manager for the City of Georgetown. Kim is the most excellent asset we have for our downtown. A lot of other cities call Kim to say, how does Georgetown do this? And so Kim not only supports our small business community downtown, she also manages our Main Street program, which is very much responsible for the wonderful condition that many of our buildings are in today. And we'll go through a little bit of that in our presentation. So Kim, thanks so much for being here. Kim's also gonna share some great information about shopping downtown this holiday season and how we can do that safely and still support the small businesses that are part of the square we all love so much. As we do get started, I want to remind everybody that we have design guidelines update getting kicked off. And so the webpage that you use to access this Zoom meeting, if you're with us live in Zoom, if you're on Facebook, you can go to historic.georgetown.org, and there's a blue button right there at the top. And it says, click here for information on the Downtown and Old Town Overlay Design Guidelines Update. What that is the design guidelines are the special requirements that we have for projects in our historic districts. And the last time they were updated was in 2012. So it's been a few years. We have a lot of great new projects. We have a lot of great new businesses. We have a lot of great new property owners. Our design guidelines are the special rules that help us to understand how we can protect and retain Georgetown's historic character in our historic districts. And so every several years, we have another look at those, make sure that they're still giving us the guidance that we need. City Council adopted some changes last year, changed some of the review requirements. And so we want to make sure that the design guidelines are consistent with those changes, but also sometimes we get new technologies. And so the way that we illuminate signs today is different than what we had available to us in 2012. So that's another great area to look at. Are there updates needed? Are there any changes that need to be made so that we can give that good, clear guidance that we need for new signs, for additions, for new buildings, how to take care of historic materials? Those are all things we're having a look at. So if you go to our update page and then scroll down a little bit, you can see where we've had some meetings, but we've also got some upcoming meetings. We're going to share some information also at the Breakfast Bites meeting this week. There will be a City Council workshop on December 8th. You can watch that live if you'd like to. You can go to agendas.georgetown.org to see the agenda posted with the meeting link. We'll be sharing with council where we are in this process. And then also you can attend, and we would love for you to attend a virtual open house. And what that is going to be is our design guidelines consultant, Post Oak Preservation Solutions, is going to give a presentation about the Old Town Georgetown and Downtown Georgetown, our historic cores of our city. They're going to give a presentation, share some awesome information. It'll be really fun. And then they're going to, from there, ask for your feedback. They're going to give you some examples of what additions could look like, what signage could look like. And we're asking for your feedback that you'll be able to give live in the meeting by selecting some options. Or if you're not able to attend live, we're going to record video and we'll still have that survey available. So if you'll just go to this webpage, historic.georgetown.org, you'll be able to access the link for that. And if you need anything, we've got contact information for me and for the planning department if we can assist with any questions. So hope that you'll make it on the 16th. And if not, we hope you'll be able to watch the video and respond to the survey in the week following as we get up to Christmas. So we're going to start 135 years ago. We've been shopping in downtown longer than that, but the first really clear indication that we have of what businesses we had downtown is from this 1885 Sanborn fire insurance map. They drew out all of the buildings on the square, and they also drew out what the businesses were on the square. This one is a little bit different than the rest. Usually north is up on a map. In this case, north is to the left. So at the very top of the screen, we're looking at the east side of the square, and at the bottom side of where it says Brushy Street became Austin Avenue. So our map is kind of tilted to the side compared to what we usually see. So that's to get you oriented. We can see there were a mix of wood buildings, that's the yellow, and stone buildings, that's the blue. And we can also see in 1885, we had some really cool businesses. We had a jeweler, we had a hardware and harness store, we had a drugstore, we had a bunch of grocery stores and cigars. Cigars were significant enough sales that they made it onto the map. We had millineries where you could buy a hat. 1885 though, and this map looks really sophisticated and the store types are sophisticated. I'm seeing one that says jeweler and toys. They're right on San Gabriel Street, which is now 7th Street. But Georgetown looked like this in 1886. And so the picture that we see of the business is a little bit different than the buildings that we see. Or at least for me, they maybe don't match as well.
Yes, absolutely. They don't match as well. And a lot of times things were different than we think of them now. So right now you can actually see at the bottom of the screen there that it says barber shop. You wouldn't have gone there just for a shave or a haircut. You might have gone there to get a tooth pulled.
Oh,
so there's some differences and changes too in what buildings actually are, but you do see a lot of buildings that are kind of multi-purpose, like a jewelry and toy store, just like you see today, that kind of have this mixed use. There's a confectionery and bookstore, and later we'll see another jewelry and bookstore. So there's a lot of fitting as much as you can into as little space as you can.
okay. And this is the east side of the square. So this is looking from the courthouse to the east. Only 2 buildings in this photo are still there on the square. There's a few houses. The Presbyterian Church is still there, but it looks very different today. And so this side of the square, most sides of the square actually changed the buildings a little bit later on, but 2 buildings are still there. The building that Mikey V's taco shop has been in is kind of right there in the middle. You can see the stone facade. There's a window on either side, but not one in the middle. And then you can also see the Georgetown Winery building that was just built. It's kind of right there on the right, and it's got a little triangle at the top of the building. One thing that you can see in this photo, because it was taken from the top part of the courthouse, is there are some skylights on the roofs. And so think about those skylights and keep those in mind as we continue on, because they're going to come back. So if we look a little bit closer, in 1885, hardware stores, a law office, the post office is where the big PO is, furniture stores, a bank, dry goods, groceries, grain, clothes. There was just a lot on the square. I'm starting to see kind of what you talked about, barber, books and stationery. And so a meat, a grocery, a baker. Basically, you went downtown to get everything that you needed because there wasn't another place to shop. It was all located in the downtown. And we like this picture a lot because I suspect that there's sawdust on the floor, which I find highly entertaining. I've read about this in novels, but I'd never seen it. There's buckets hanging from the ceiling. And the only light, this is in 1895, so the only light was from lanterns and not from electric bulbs. Even though it seems like, oh, well, you would have electricity, but that's why we also had skylights in some of our buildings, because most of our buildings on the square were built before we had electric light bulbs in them.
Exactly. So a lot of them were initially wired for electricity, and that's another reason why those Sanborn and fire insurance maps were so important, is you have so many wooden buildings and you have so many lanterns in wooden buildings. Or you mentioned the cigars. Think about what's happening in cigar cellars. There's smoking, there's fire. So of course you want to note where the fires might start. And yeah, absolutely. There's some sort of sawdust or straw on the ground. And as you'll see a little bit later, that has to do with the conditions outside and what you would be walking through to do your shopping. And this is just kind of your typical 1895 grocery store. You have a lot of things to do, manual labor at home, so large barrels for whatever use you may see fit for them, either gathering materials, washing things, all sorts of different uses. So it'll look a little bit different when we look at one that's more into the 1920s, a little bit later, it looks a little more familiar. One thing I did want to note, though, is M.Z. Taylor, who ended up doing a lot of things in Georgetown. He started some of the city lights and things like that. When he was 6 years old, his father owned a store on the square. And he, at 6, was tasked with sleeping on top of a display case with a rifle to guard the store at night sometimes. So that's kind of the atmosphere of the 1800s in Georgetown.
Wow.
And shopping.
Well, I see too, and I hadn't realized this previously because there's a lot in this photo, but just to the right of the Apex axle grease advertisement, it looks like there's a bunch of bananas. So could we really get bananas in Georgetown in 1895?
It would actually depend so much. I mean, so much of it depended on the growing seasons and what people would bring in. Another story that's tied to M.Z. Taylor is during the Civil War, his wife, when he was courting her, a lot of suitors brought her candy, which was hard to get, but pretty easy to get during the Civil War. And he actually brought her oranges because his father was a merchant. He could get a hold of the oranges, and that was such a special treat to her that she was like, this is the one, this is the guy.
That's so funny. Well, but that makes sense. It would have been like a very precious thing. I'm just, bananas, 1895 to 2020. One thing that we wanted to highlight for you too, next time you walk around the square or you're near older commercial buildings, one thing that you can look at and notice is that up above the canopies, you'll often see a line of windows. These windows were to help get light into the building, again, before we had electric bulbs. And so electricity was kind of discovered and able to be used kind of well back 100 years before the photos that we're showing now. But the incandescent bulb hadn't been invented until the later 1800s. And so that was kind of a new technology. Before that, we were using these lanterns. And so to help with lighting the interior of these stores, they would have these windows up above the canopies. And so as electric lighting came into use and became much easier to get installed, and light bulbs, sometimes you see those windows covered up because they're not as necessary. Those windows also could serve to help ventilate a building. Provide for a way for the warm air to get out in the summer. And so anytime you see a historic building feature, it's always good to kind of notice it and think, that may have had a little bit different purpose back before we had some of the technologies that we have today. One thing that I was really surprised at is how many grocery stores we had on the square. So this is just 4 years later, 1889, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, at least 8 identified grocery stores on the square. And that just seems like a lot. But Anne, you were telling me that it wasn't really what I thought it was.
Well, so there wasn't a one giant store that you could go to. There was no H-E-B, there was no Walmart that you could go get everything at. And so a lot of these grocers, they might carry some similar staples, but would carry different items. So when you go through receipts from this time period that people had, you'll see people shopping at all of these different stores getting different things because of the variety is different at each store, their offerings are. So people literally are walking all the way around the square to do their shopping.
And today I walk around the square just because it's pretty and fun, but still great opportunities to shop all around the square, which is one of the reasons we love it so much. So this is a little bit closer, zoom in. This is 1905. So we've crossed into the 20th century here, and still a ton of grocery stores on the square. Places that you could get food, places that you could get supplies. Down there on the bottom, on the south side of the square, it just says meat. So I don't know if that was a lot of meat that they provided. I don't know what the quality of the meat was. I don't think that they had refrigeration. I'm a little bit concerned, but the Sanborn map says meat, so they had some kind of meat offerings.
There would have been the ice works was established at this point, so they at least had ice box and things like that. Yeah. Well, my favorite thing to note is there's almost always a confectionery somewhere on all of the Sanborn maps, which means there's almost always been a candy store on the square.
And so here we're in 1916, moving a little bit further forward. A lot of the buildings on the square that we see today came about after 1900. Not all of them. We have some from the 1800s, but we also have some newer ones. So what I wanted to highlight is On the north side of the square in particular, where all of those red colored buildings are, those are all brick buildings, and those were all built after 1912, if I remember correctly. So there was kind of a big gap in the north side of the square for a little bit, and then they built the new buildings that some of y'all might remember as Gold's department store. We've got other buildings in there today. We've got some retailers, we've got a coffee shop. And so what's really interesting though, is we see a lot of the same kinds of businesses for a very long time. Although we're starting to see in 1916, auto supplies, furniture, a variety store, the post office was still there. I'm now seeing a restaurant, a barber, the confectionery again, a print shop. We're starting to see variety stores. We're starting to see auto supply stores. And apparently you could buy a car downtown at this time too.
You could. Some of the first retailers for cars and for auto sales were actually hardware stores downtown. So Lindell Peterson, which was in one of those earlier photos that you could see, was a hardware store, and they were one of the first automotive dealers.
That's amazing. So instead, we didn't have the highways the way that we have them today. And so instead of going to the interstate to go to a car dealer to get your car, you would have just gone downtown like you went downtown for everything else, and then driven home, I guess, in your brand new car that you had bought at the hardware store. And so moving into the 1920s, this is when we start to get some really cool store interiors. So Anna and I often show you building exteriors. We were really excited to use this opportunity to show you what the inside of our buildings look like. This is 100 years ago. So if you were shopping downtown 100 years ago, this is what you would have seen, specifically at Star Grocery.
Yes. Star Grocery was around for a while, so you can see it's starting to change. It's a little bit different from that 1895 grocery store. There's suddenly a lot more pre-packaged, pre-processed food that's available in cans along the back wall, although there's still a lot of bulk, obviously, there in the front that you can buy. As you mentioned, now one of the biggest things is there's lights that you can see up at the top. So suddenly we have electricity, and you don't have to just use your windows and skylights to shop by anymore.
I mean, I buy the wrong thing off the shelf today anyway. I probably would have done a really poor job if I didn't have better lighting. Sometimes I don't look very closely at canned goods and I get the wrong kind of tomatoes. So I'm sure other people don't have those problems, but it's pretty common for me.
Tomatoes are rough.
The Brady drugstore is one of the most beautiful photos that we have of an interior. And was this kind of typical, do we know, for them? Or was this like a grand opening or a really fancy day? Because they have all these streamers from the ceiling, and I'd love to see that again somewhere.
So what I've actually seen of the Brady drugstore, they did like to decorate, just like almost anyone, that strikes their fancy. And it is a kind of a thing to note too, is this is kind of that stereotypical drugstore that we think of, because you can see the seats at the counter. You can see that they have soda and things like that they're starting to serve along with retail. And then the Wilcox jewelry and bookstore, I just kind of really liked because the two combined together. Just go get in all your gift purchasing needs there. The jewelry store and bookstore.
And it looks really fancy. I think what we've decided is that might have been an umbrella case there at the front where you could also purchase an umbrella. And then we have, and I had never heard of this before, so I was so excited. We had a place called the Toggery.
The Toggery. So this was actually a staple. It was a staple in Georgetown for a long time. And one of the things that I like about this, that it really demonstrates, is we think of Georgetown, it was a small town at that time. And you're going downtown to do all of your grocery shopping and things like that, but it still has Southwestern in town. And this business really catered to Southwestern. A lot of their advertisements talk about how the college man has to be well dressed. And so they're around for a couple of decades. And people from Southwestern very often frequent them. And if you go to the next slide, you'll actually see we have this little area of the square. There's the Toggery. It's there on the east side on Main Street. And then right next to it is a confectionery and then book and school supplies at a place called the Alcove. And so all of these businesses right next to each other are specifically targeting Southwestern students and that business, trying to get them to come downtown, to shop local, and to get them outfitted in some, smart looking suits, which they definitely did. There's some well-dressed men in Southwestern yearbooks at this time period. So
Absolutely. Actually, everybody seemed really, really spiffy looking.
yeah.
So you can find, if you're interested, you can find the collection of archived Southwestern yearbooks online. They hold them in a digital archive, and they are wonderful to look at. They have them well over 100 years of Southwestern yearbooks, and they're scanned cover to cover. And so that's sometimes a great place to see photos of Southwestern students and faculty and staff, but also sometimes you see some neat photos of Georgetown or the square or different advertisements, which we really enjoy quite a bit. Two really notable businesses, we don't get to enjoy them today, but the Belford Lumber Company was a major player in constructing houses and commercial buildings in Georgetown. Y'all may have heard of the Belford National Register Historic District that we have on Main Street and Austin Avenue. And then also the Atkins Furniture Store, which was in the building that we now know today as Gumbo's. It's the old Masonic Lodge. So these were kind of the anchors of downtown for a long time, I think. Is that right?
That's true. That's true. And Belford, of course, like you said, he's constructing a lot of houses, remodeling a lot of houses. So this is kind of his showroom where you could go, pick out some things that you like. And then he also at different times, not consistently, but at different times, sold wagons and things like that. So again, it goes back to that kind of multi-purpose. You have a small base of retailers and they kind of got to fit everyone's needs. And then of course the Atkins Furniture Company, which was there for many, many years. And they were there to help you fill your home with things, including all of your appliances. So it wasn't just furniture. It was kind of like a Sears almost, where it was your furniture, but also your stove or your washing machine when they came into being, and all of the things that you might need.
That's so cool. And then we started seeing variety stores on the square. So I'm really familiar with the variety store. I definitely frequented one when I was a kid. But if people aren't sure what a variety store is or they're not familiar, what is a variety store? What did they offer?
So they could offer all sorts of different things. They were there, yeah, variety. So kind of like a department store-ish, more like Walmart. I like to think of it like the Target dollar center when you first come in more, but you could find all sorts of things there. I really like the Perry Brothers, the 5, 10, 25-cent store right there on the right, because people really are familiar with like 5 and dimes and like the nickel candy. That's usually what people can think of when they're thinking of a variety store. But we had a lot of them on the square. Henderson's, that's up in the upper left, was probably the longest lived out of these. Although Stone's Drug also lasted a long time, as well as did Newman's, which was more of a department store. So that one was actually more of a clothing store. But yeah, you could come down and get all sorts of different needs, whether you were a kid, and a lot of kids would come down and get candy right before going over to the Palace or the Ritz and watching a movie. But that could be your whole night on the square. Just come do a little bit of shopping, then go to a movie, just hanging out, just like you would do now.
That's so fun.
So yeah.
This is such a great photo.
It is. And we don't really know a ton about it. Although again, you need furniture. There's a need. So of course there's a furniture store downtown. I like it though for kind of telling you about what your shopping experience would have been like downtown. So you can see everyone is sitting outside, and that goes back to what you've talked about. There's no central air. So usually, even when the merchants are sitting outside to catch a breeze, if at all possible, and then they'll come inside with you as needed. 2 is that you can see that street is not paved. And we've talked a little bit about that before, but cattle drives are still going through downtown at this time. The streets aren't paved. It's dusty or muddy, and it's mucky with all of the things that come with having livestock downtown brings. So actually on the next slide, you'll see people had to adapt. This is the Makinson building, which is actually a hotel at this time. But they've put in this sort of like plank to try to get over that nasty kind of gutter that you might experience just walking downtown. You had to make do and adapt.
This is almost straight out of a Western movie. And so you tend to think, oh, it's a movie, it's a set, but we're seeing it really in Georgetown that we needed to almost have these drawbridges to get across, where the gutter would have gotten really gross so that people didn't get their shoes all muddy and track it in and make a mess for one of the store owners or the business owners to clean up. So that's really funny. Thankfully, we've got those paved streets today, but for a really long time, we didn't. And then this looks like, I can't tell if they're having a party or if everybody just wanted to show up for the photo, wheelbarrows and all.
It's liable to be either way with Henry Brookhart. His nickname was Heine Brookhart. And he's a really interesting guy. He is born in Germany. He ends up joining the Austrian army, and they bring him to Mexico. He's captured. He gets out of that, ends up in Texas, and eventually makes his way up to Georgetown, where he begins operating a cigar stand, just a stand on the courthouse lawn, and then eventually works his way up to a store. And he sells all sorts of different things. So he sells cigars, he does barbers, and then if you click, you'll actually see one of the things that he sells is his ringworm salve. And he, in his advertisement, every advertisement that I've ever seen of his that he takes out declares, remember, I will pay $100 reward for any case of ringworm that my salve fails to cure. But you also see he's doing all sorts of different things. So he's selling salves as a barber. He's selling cosmetics, bay rum. He's working as an agent for the laundry. And so they're doing a lot of different things in these places. Why the barber had wheelbarrows, I have no idea.
No, but it looks very fun and patriotic, and I can't tell if this was just the end of a parade or, like I said, everybody just wanted to show up for the photo, because sometimes that happened. But I like that he sold the celebrated cream of roses. That seems like some pretty significant advertising. Kind of like he might have been the only place on the square in downtown Georgetown that you could get such a thing. So
from what we know of him, he was a wheeler and dealer. And just as an interesting side note, if you ever want to go visit him, he is buried in the International Order of the Oddfellow Cemetery, right back behind Southwestern, and his tombstone is the only brick and mortar tombstone in the cemetery. So it's a very odd tombstone. So he was definitely an interesting man. How
fun. Can't have a downtown without having characters. That's true today as it was then. So this might not look very familiar to a lot of our viewers who haven't seen. This is a much older photo of a building that is at the corner of 8th Street and Austin Avenue today. Mm-hmm. So we've shown it before. We've talked about it. This was the Makinson Hotel, but it had a few different uses over its lifetime. And so it looks a little bit different today because it's been through a lot of exterior changes. You don't see this kind of covered sidewalk the same way. There are canopies on it, just not the covered sidewalk with the columns that we had. But this was actually a pretty significant business, I think.
It was. So John Henry Lovell, this was one of his first ventures. And then he ends up actually operating a mercantile kind of across the street on the other corner of 8th and Austin Avenue. He becomes a very successful local merchant. He's actually the one that built that beautiful 3-story home at 803 College Street that a lot of people know and are familiar with, back behind Williams Elementary kind of. But one of my favorite stories about him is that he is one of the first people to really employ female clerks in his stores. He just thought they were better workers. And so he does this in the 1890s at a time when no one else really, especially downtown, is doing it. He's also one of the first people in the Austin area to get a mechanical cash register. And this causes such an uproar that he actually advertises it, and people come in from all around the area, from Round Rock, from North Austin, just to see this mechanical cash register at work.
That's so funny. I wonder how much he had to pay for it.
I have no idea.
I mean, you know, our business owners today have to consider their point of sale system. Are you going to use, you know, like kind of a more expensive platform? They came out with Square and some other point of sale platforms, trying to make it easier both for the business owner and also for the customer. But at that time, that probably would have been quite a thing to have that come in on a wagon or on the train and unload it. And it was like this beautiful new mechanical cash register that apparently drew people from 30 or more miles away. Just
it was an event.
That's quite fantastic. So as we kind of roll out of the late 1800s, early 1900s, we start to see buildings looking a lot more familiar to us today. The signage has really changed. I really love some of this beautiful signage that we have back from the 20s and 30s. We can see, though, we were getting telephone poles, we were getting electric poles. You can see the vehicles are starting to change. This is Austin Avenue looking north. The Piggly Wiggly was there on the right. We kind of talked about Piggly Wiggly a couple of episodes ago. You can see our current courthouse with some really big, those look like oak trees around it. I don't think those are the pecans. I think those are oaks. And then we also start to see, going into the 40s, we're rolling into the Christmas season. And so we wanted to show our Santa Claus photo. He's there at the very bottom. You can see the back of Santa's head. But you can also see the Atkins Furniture Company that we talked about. There's furniture, floor covers, stoves, electric appliances, Ellen Watkins furniture. We see a Coca-Cola sign. And there was just a lot going on the square. That is where people came and did business. One of my favorite photos of anywhere on the square at any point in time is this Tartan Stores photo. If the building looks a little bit familiar, this is where the Escape is now in the Evans building. And so what a difference. And also some really big signage there for the Tartan Stores. So discount health and beauty aids, you can kind of think that this is like maybe an earlier version of combination variety store, Walgreens, CVS, something like that, where you would have gone to get cosmetic and health products. And then this is the building, the same building that we just talked about with the Piggly Wiggly. It looks very different on the outside today. There have been some brick changes. So when we talk about design guidelines and how we make decisions about how our historic buildings can change, that's one of the things we look at is what kind of changes to the exterior can be made and what kind of guidance do we have. So it used to be the storefront with a lot of glass in it. You can actually see a reflection of the photographer with this tripod in the very middle, which is kind of fun. And then today this building looks a bit different. So it's always fun for us to be able to show what buildings looked like before. And then the building directly to the left where Roots is now, that was just getting kind of a new stucco or kind of cement coating on the building at the time this photo was taken. You can still see that on the building today. Another photo that I really liked when we're getting toward mid-century is the Modern Electric Incorporated. And I love the contrast between this business name, Modern Electric, and how kind of old Western the style of the building is with the wood doors. And then these really great kind of wonderful, but also kind of modern looking lanterns out front. So that's on 8th Street, kind of where Barrels and Amps, the Dave Stripper is. There's some law offices that these openings have been changed a little bit. But this is what they looked like back then. And then some of us still remember Berry Hardware having a hardware store on the square. Again, you didn't go out to the highway. You didn't go out to the interstate to a big box store. It was all right here on the square. So we can see this great photo of Chisholm Trail Western Wear right next to Berry Hardware in the building that's, it's on Austin Avenue, right in the middle. It's the Milan building. And I think today you can see a painting shop and bakery, and then you can also see a new restaurant in there. And so this is what that looked like before the Main Street program. So Kim, we're really excited to have you because you have a lot of familiarity with the changes that we started making in the 1980s. This is a photo, I think from maybe 76, could be somewhere in the late 60s, early 70s. by that time, our downtown was not quite as interesting because we really began to change how we shopped, what kind of buildings we used, and how big those buildings were for businesses. So you started to see shopping malls, you started to see big box stores, and they serve a great purpose for sure, but it also meant that we saw a lot of historic downtowns in decline. And so one of the great things that happened in the 80s is that Georgetown was a very early adopter for the Main Street program. And that program was focused on downtown revitalization. And so a lot of the great hard work that began in the 1980s is something that we're able to enjoy the success of today. And you can see, I'll go back again. Here's what we were looking at kind of when downtown had kind of hit a point of decline. And then here's what we see today, also with these really beautiful trees and wonderfully painted and maintained storefronts. And then here's Austin Avenue. Again, we're getting kind of later on in the 70s. A lot of these buildings were nearing 100 years old at this point. You see Gelman's there, that's now Barrels and Amps. The Strongberg Hoffman building had been covered up with stucco, and now a lot of that's been removed to show the original storefront. And then we look at it today, they're wonderful. And so, Kim, we have your program to thank for that, and then the continuing work that you do. The Main Street program does a lot to support both our small businesses, but also for facade rehabilitation grants. Do you mind talking a little bit about that while I go through the rest of the photos?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The Main Street program, like you mentioned, has a facade and sign grant program that was started in 2004. And really since that time, we've had over $500,000 worth of grants given to property owners and businesses that goes towards some of this beautiful restoration work that you see. And it's really just kind of shows that if you're investing in your community, you can really see some positive changes. So that's why I think the Main Street program is even more relevant now than when it started, because it's really caught on. There's over 2,000 Main Street cities across the country, and it's just this great movement. And we were fortunately one of the early adopters. We began the program here in Georgetown in 1982. And so it's taken some time and a lot of patience, a lot of hard work. There's so many groups and individuals that contributed to what Georgetown is today. And so it's a lot of that good work that happened back years ago and into today's time that just makes Georgetown special. It's a really beautiful community, and we love to call ourselves the most beautiful town square in Texas. And I think that it's fitting because, in my opinion, it is.
Well, especially during the holiday season. So that's what we want to make sure y'all know too. Our square is open for business, and so we do want to make sure that we stay safe right now. We do want to make sure we take great precautions, mask wearing, washing hands, staying distant, as much as possible. But also, our small businesses are open for business, and they are ready to have you shop. This is a really important part of the year, and so a couple of things are going on. One, we've got the square illuminated for the holidays, which we all love so much. This picture is just stunning, and it's such a happy time to be downtown. But also, Kim, y'all have some kind of special programs going on just especially for this holiday season. So could you share some of that with us?
Sure. So, although times have changed, history has a way of repeating itself, and downtown is one of the gathering places in our community once again, where people just want to go. And for the holidays especially, I mean, look at this picture. It's like straight out of a Hallmark movie, and I just love it. It warms my heart to go walk the streets in downtown, and I hope that others feel the same. Many of the businesses right now are offering late night holiday shopping, so you can go out and walk the sidewalks, enjoy the beautiful Christmas lights, but also get some shopping done. And right now there are so many cool, interesting things that you can buy for your loved ones and friends. I know that this past weekend, it was Small Business Saturday, and we had a lot of businesses that participated with that. And I did some shopping. I did probably way too much shopping, but I was happy to do it because, I was marking things off my Christmas list for my friends and family. And so I encourage everybody to go check out the stores if you feel safe to do so. The stores do have their safety precautions in place. Mask wearing is in effect. And if for some reason you don't feel comfortable going out, a lot of the businesses have online shopping options right now. So you can go to our Main Street website and click on the shop small information, and it has links to every business that has a website or a Facebook page where they're able to offer items for sale online or through their curbside pickup options.
That is really helpful information. And then we have a special item that we want to let people know about. This is not the first year that we've done this, but this is an ongoing tradition that has a really special meaning for our downtown.
Yes, the Main Street Christmas ornament, I think it's been 11 years now that we've had this in place, maybe 12. And this started with trying to raise money for the downtown Christmas lights. And it has evolved to also support our facade and sign grant program. So for every purchase of a Main Street ornament or our coordinated greeting cards that also feature Austin Avenue, those proceeds go back to support our facade and sign grant program. And that helps us to maintain the most beautiful town square in Texas. So these are for sale for $20 and available at the Georgetown Visitor Center, which is located on 7th Street next to Grape Creek Winery. And I had a recent conversation with the folks at the Visitor Center, and they're already more than halfway sold out, and it's only December 1st. So
wow.
If you want an ornament, I definitely encourage you to go get that soon, because once they're gone, they're gone. We don't reorder. It's a collectible. We limit the number that we purchase each year. And so that's what makes it even more special. So this one is really one of my favorites. I say that every year because we tend to outdo ourselves each year, but I really love this one because it shows a lot of the stores, and it's a very beautiful side of the square that features a lot of that high Victorian architecture that Georgetown is known for. And so I think that Austin Avenue is just really charming on this. And we hope to continue this tradition of maybe featuring street scenes with multiple businesses and buildings in the future. So stay tuned to see what we choose next year.
I'm with you. I think this is my favorite. It's so beautiful. Thankfully, I already have mine. But if you do want to get that, make sure you visit the visitor center soon because they are limited edition. But this goes to support some of the wonderful maintenance that people do for our buildings on the square. It helps to maintain the facades, and you can imagine some of these buildings are a little bit newer, but a lot of the buildings are at least 100 years old, and some a little older than 135 years old. So we want to make sure we can continue to shop in them, and this is one of the ways that we help support taking great care of our historic buildings. So if you need to contact us, you can email us at historic@georgetown.org or give us a call. My number and Ann's number are both there. Or you can visit mainstreet.georgetown.org. That's how you find information about the Main Street program and what they've got going on. They have a fantastic webpage. Kim, thanks so much for doing some great web content. It's really informative. It's easy to navigate. And if you're on Facebook, the downtown Facebook page is a really great page to follow so that you can stay up to date on all the comings and goings downtown, both during the holidays and then afterwards. And that's where you can get some great information. So it's the Downtown Georgetown Facebook page. It has a whole lot of followers, myself included. And so that's a great way to stay connected to them. Nat, did we have any questions during the presentation, or does anybody want to ask any questions for us as we kind of wrap up?
Yeah, you got a couple questions from the Facebook group. The first one is about history of meat markets on the square. If anybody knows about that, the information about meat markets in downtown.
Anne, do you know the history of meat markets specifically? Because I know we were a cattle drive town, and so we've had cattle here since the beginning of things.
Yes, absolutely. And I think someone mentioned the abattoir too, which wasn't exactly downtown. It was downtown, but it wasn't exactly on the square. It was kind of back behind Austin Avenue, sort of. I'm blanking on the exact building. Its name. Do you remember, Britain? But it's kind of back behind, like it's almost directly behind the middle of Austin Avenue, kind of back there was the abattoir.
Where Six Whiskey is?
Yes, thank you. Yes. And so, of course, it was to do with the fact that we're a cattle driving town, but also just the dynamic of towns at that time period of a lot of people are raising their own livestock, and they might be slaughtering themselves, but it might also be that you have a small quantity and you bring them downtown. It kind of depends. And then the meat markets, of course, again, are as people become more in town, and they aren't raising their own livestock as much. They might have poultry in the backyard, but that probably is about it. They're not going to be raising cattle in the middle of downtown Georgetown, at least not really. I mean, you do get a lot of free range cattle and pigs. In particular, pigs were known to destroy the courthouse lawn a lot. Into the early until you get some laws regarding it in the 20s, in the 1920s. So, and that's why in some of those early photos in the 1890s, you can actually still see fences around the front yards and backyards of people's houses. It's to keep out livestock as much as it is to keep in things. So of course you have meat markets downtown because there's a demand for meat. And again, it's just going back to like that kind of idea that you have a butcher, someone that specializes in it and has the know-how to do it properly. So it's a little bit different than a traditional grocery store. It also is, again, that time period, having the specialized equipment to store it properly, to hang it, to cure it, something to do with it, to keep it preserved.
And great. Another question from Facebook was, is the title company that we showed earlier the building that used to be the ice cream bucket?
Oh, that's a great question. So where you saw a little bit of the title company, and I think that would have been the photo that was, I had the Tartan Beauty Aid store up where the Escape is now. So the building directly left of that for a very long time was Georgetown Title Company. They're now off of Rock Street. So they've relocated, and that's Mikey V's at the moment. But the ice cream bucket is one of Anne's favorites. And we showed this in a previous presentation. That was in the Makinson building, or the building that's on the corner of 8th and Austin Avenue.
So that's what Capital Title. There is a title company in there now. Capital Title is right there, but not Georgetown Title.
One other interesting thing about the location where the ice cream bucket is, or was, the Main Street program, when it was first established, that was one of the very first preservation projects that underwent a major facade change. And so we've got some great photos of that when it shows, Main Street work in progress.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's one of the early ones.
And then if you check out that previous episode that we did, Anne told a wonderful ghost story about the ice cream bucket in case anybody's interested.
Yes. And it's also that building that we showed earlier, the Makinson building, with the kind of plank, the drawbridge, going over the muck and the mud into the street.
We have another question that Kim might know, but talking about the 7th and Main, the old city council chambers, Tina Heine is asking for any early day photos of 7th and Main, and what years did it serve as a library and prior to that a funeral home?
So that one, and you might know this better than I, that, not at the very beginning, but very early on, that was the Oddfellows building. So Anne talked about the International Order of Oddfellows Cemetery that's behind Southwestern at the end of East 7th Street. their lodge building was there on that corner from about the turn of the 20th century on. And so we had the Masonic Lodge, but we also had the Oddfellows Lodge. They were two different kind of social orders right across the street from each other. And we've shown the Oddfellows building before, kind of in the corners of pictures. It was a really, really spectacular 3-story building. It's one of the largest we've ever had on the square. And that was in place until I think the 1970s. And then that building was demolished and it became city-owned property. And so that was where the first location of the Georgetown Public Library was. And the library has gone to a couple of different locations since. The funeral home, I think, was in the house behind it where we have a parking lot now. And so I don't know that the funeral home was on that corner, but I think it was in the house that was at the corner of 6th Street and Main Street, which would have been kind of on the southeast corner where we have a parking lot now that we use for the visitor center, and that used to be the parking lot for old council chambers.
I think there was one point in the 60s where the Davis Funeral Home may have operated out of that 3-story stone building.
Okay.
When he was operating, because before we had EMS, funeral homes were primarily your ambulances. And so I think there's a couple of stories of him operating out of there when he is working and serving as the ambulance for the Georgetown Hospital.
Okay.
I'd have to double check that though, so don't take that for what it is. But it was Armistead Fisher Davis, I believe, and he was the ambulance driver and funeral home director. Yeah.
We love questions. So if you have a question now, feel free to ask. We have a couple more minutes, or you can always email historic@georgetown.org. And if we don't know the answer, we will try to find it out. But Anne pretty much knows the answers to everything. So that's really handy to have her knowledge and expertise with us.
Between us all, we get there.
I think that's it on the Facebook questions. There are a couple of people who've joined us through Zoom. If anybody would like to share or ask a question of the audience, now would be the time. Just go ahead and unmute yourself and fire away.
And one question that we do need to make sure we answer is that, will we have a Tuesday Talks in January? The answer is no, we're gonna take a short break. That'll be kind of right after the Christmas holidays, and we wanna make sure we have good time to prepare our next episode. So no Tuesday Talks for January. We will come back in February. And so the link will be the same. It'll be posted in the same place on historic.georgetown.org. Really excited about what we're planning for February. That'll be a really fun episode. If you've missed any of our episodes, you can just follow the link on the front page of historic.georgetown.org to see past episodes. We've recorded those, put them on YouTube. And so if you want to show family or friends over the holiday season or catch yourself wanting to get caught up, then you can certainly do that. We're really looking forward to presenting new content next year in 2021. So Kim, thank you so much for joining us and sharing that information about Main Street and about how we can shop small, about the Christmas ornament. So if you want one of those or want several of those, be sure you go ahead and get that before they run out. And if you have questions, you can contact the Main Street office. That'll be Kim, and you can find all of that information at mainstreet.georgetown.org. So, and thank you also for your expertise and for bringing us wonderful information from our award-winning Georgetown Public Library. We hope everybody has a safe and happy holiday season, and we're looking forward to seeing you again next year. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Having me.